A lot of the commentary around this year's federal budget has centred on the negative aspects that were brought down by the government, but there were actually some positives to come out of it as well. Joining me today is Miller Super Solutions founder Tim Miller to talk about some of those positive aspects. Welcome, Tim.
Hi Darren, thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Now, getting straight into it, the 10% rule was one of the contentious rules that has been around for a while. That got scrapped. What was the 10% rule and why is this a good thing?
Yeah, so the 10% rule was effectively a rule that provided for substantially self-employed people to be able to claim a tax deduction on the contributions they made to superannuation. So the 10% was effectively an allowance to say that you could earn up to 10% of your income from employment-related employment and still generate a deduction on your self-employed income. So it gave a little bit of leeway. So that's what it was. And effectively what this announcement is to say, well, regardless of where your income comes from, you can contribute up to, and the cap is $25,000, and claim a tax deduction. So it's effectively giving people the capacity beyond 1 July 2017 to have their super guarantee contributions go in, and then they can top that up to the cap from their after-tax money and claim a personal tax deduction. So it's effectively giving equality to self-employed and employees across how much they contribute.
Great. Now, one of the other talking points has been the ability to have people roll forward the unused portion of their concessional contributions caps of $25,000. Obviously a positive thing because you can use it in a more flexible manner.
Yeah, look, again, it's one of those things and it's introducing new terminology to superannuation. So we've been used for the last 10 years to this concept of bringing forward a contribution, so bring forward something that you're entitled to in a future year to make a larger non-concessional contribution. But now what they're saying is that if you have unused contribution limits, that you can carry them forward and claim them in a later year. So this gives you, greater flexibility, particularly if you've got, say, a large taxable event occurring in a later year, to be able to bank some of your concessional contributions and offset your tax liability in that year, or you might have broken working patterns and other things. So again, I think this is a really good measure to be able to utilise your contributions and those concessions as you see fit over any sort of period of time.
There's only a 5-year window for that, isn't there?
Yeah, so this is the interesting element. They've introduced this concept of a carry forward period of 5 years. So it's going to involve obviously a fair bit of administrative management by the fund to identify when you've started using your contributions and how far back you can go. So theoretically you can get to year 5 and claim $125,000 contribution, having not claimed anything in the previous 5 years. But then if you put some in that year, that's the start of a new cycle. So you've always got to make sure you go back far enough in the cycle, but far enough to know when you've gone past that 5-year period.
Now there is another restriction in that set of rules, and that is that your superannuation balance has to be under $500,000.
Yeah.
Is that going to be very difficult to measure?
Difficult's a good word, an interesting word. I think I don't want to say it's going to be impossible to measure the $500,000 balance, but so far history has shown us that anything that has to be measured against a member's balance is very difficult given the Australian population and the fact that there's 31 million plus superannuation accounts out there. It's about consolidating that information and the timeliness of that and the collating of that information. Is that stored by the tax office? Is it APRA? Who has all that information? And how is that information going to be reported back to members to know where they sit at any given point in time with regards to the $500,000 limit.
Now, when does that effectively kick in?
So these measures take effect from 1 July 2017. So the $25,000 cap is reduced from the existing $30,000 at that date. So that's the first year in the carry forward process. So in effect, what we're actually saying is that the $500,000 balance is going to be measured for the first time in the 18-19 year, because people that don't utilise it in the 17-18 year will carry forward that amount into the next year. So we're talking about $500,000 in 3 years' time.
Now, to your knowledge, Tim, has any indexation been mentioned around that measure?
No, there have been a number of measures where in the budget papers they identified how those amounts would be indexed. This one wasn't one of those such measures, and it's not totally unexpected, because the last time a government of ours tried to introduce a $500,000 cap, that was also unindexed, and that was when they tried to introduce a higher and lower contribution limit. So at this point in time, no cap or no indexation associated with that cap, and so $500,000 now isn't $500,000 in 3 years' time.
Yeah. Now, while we're on these concessional contributions caps, the age has been increased also as to how long people can, within their life cycle, can keep contributing towards their super.
Yeah, and I think this was one of the really positive measures, and probably one that the industry has actually been seeking out for quite some time now, and that is that we've always had the capacity to make contributions and self-employed contributions up until effectively immediately prior to our 75th birthday, but they've always been contingent on us satisfying a work test. So we've had to work for 40 hours in a 30 consecutive day period. What we're doing now is removing that work test. So effectively anybody up until age 74, so just prior to their 75th birthday, can utilise that $25,000 cap. So to me it does give some form of softening of the reduction of the cap to $25,000, because we have effectively an additional 10 years, assuming we have the income to be able to offset it against, to be able to make those concessional contributions.
Now, one area that's been talked about a lot, say within the last 5 to 10 years, has been the anti-detriment provisions.
Yep.
They're gone as well. Now, can that be seen as a positive thing?
Look, I think it can, and you know, I'll probably be one of those that sits on either side of the fence on this issue. I think the idea of anti-detriment was one that was talked about more than it was enacted upon, particularly in the self-managed super industry, where the capacity to pay an anti-detriment benefit, to increase the size of a death benefit subject to a tax that you'd already given away, was always difficult. So if anything, from an equalisation style policy, the removal of anti-detriment brings unity across the entire superannuation industry. And I think from a self-managed super fund point of view, that is beneficial, because there are so many other estate planning positives associated with self-managed, that it will be good in the promotion cycle of what a self-managed super fund can do for its members.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much for taking us through the positive elements of the budget.
No problems, my pleasure, Darren.